Long before the railroads carved their way through the Ozarks, before telegraphs hummed in every town, the people of Hollow Creek lived with stories as their lifeblood. By the flicker of lantern light, old men told of one night in 1881 when Sheriff Elias Grady should have died. He was gunned down 6 times in the chest, side, and leg by the infamous Redden brothers. Yet, instead of falling into the dirt for good, he rose again, bloody, broken, but unstoppable. Some said he was a ghost walking before his time. Others swore he was God's hand made flesh. Outsiders scoffed, but to Hollow Creek the tale was not fiction, it was history. Mothers hushed children with it, preachers warned sinners through it, and travelers felt a chill as soon as the name Elias Grady passed their lips. It was a tale born of smoke, gunpowder, and sacrifice. The legend of the sheriff who refused to stay down. Elias Grady wasn't the kind of lawman who smiled in photographs or charmed crowds in town squares. He was broad-shouldered with lines carved deep around his mouth, eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights, and a voice that rumbled like gravel. He had fought in the war and carried its ghosts. Yet beneath that hard shell, there lived a man who believed in fairness. He kept a worn Bible in his desk drawer, read quietly when the town slept, and still kissed the locket that held his late wife's portrait. To many, he seemed unbreakable, the very backbone of Hollow Creek. But Elias knew his strength wasn't invincibility. It was stubbornness. When folks asked him why he didn't leave for an easier life elsewhere, he always answered the same. Because if the law won't stand here, then where will it stand? He was flawed, weary, sometimes harsh, but he was theirs. The year 1881 was remembered as the season when fear rode the mountain winds. The Redden brothers, a clan of 6 ruthless outlaws, made Hollow Creek their hunting ground. They weren't ordinary thieves. They burned what they couldn't steal, took lives as lightly as taking breath, and laughed while widows cried. They rode through villages masked, leaving nothing but smoke behind. People prayed behind bolted doors and cursed the day their town became the Reddens' playground. Farmers stopped bringing their goods to market. Schoolhouses emptied. The preacher's sermons turned from salvation to survival. And always someone would mutter, "Sheriff Grady will stop them." He has to. But Elias wasn't blind. He knew facing 6 men who thrived on violence would be near suicide. Yet each time he walked past the families in town, the mothers holding their children close, he felt the same gnawing truth. If he didn't act, no one else would. One stormy evening, the sheriff's office door burst open, rain spilling in with a desperate man. Thomas Hale, a weathered farmer with shaking hands, fell to his knees. His daughter Clara had been taken by the Redden brothers. His voice cracked as he begged, "Sheriff, they'll kill her if you follow." The air seemed to freeze. Elias rose from his chair, tall and steady, and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Listen to me. I've buried a wife, Thomas. I won't stand by and let another man bury his child." Hale sobbed, clutching the sheriff's hand as though clinging to hope itself. Elias knew the Reddens well enough to understand. This wasn't about ransom. This was cruelty for its own sake, and cruelty demanded an answer. He strapped on his revolver, adjusted his hat, and said words that became part of the legend. "Then I'll walk into hell itself, and I'll bring her home." By dusk, Elias was riding alone into the black heart of the Ozarks. The forest loomed like a cathedral of shadows, branches rattling in the autumn wind. His horse snorted nervously, sensing danger in every sound. The sheriff carried only his revolver, a lantern tied to the saddle, and the stubborn resolve that had carried him through battlefields. He didn't summon a posse. He didn't send for backup. He couldn't risk Clara's life with clumsy numbers. As he rode, he thought of her, a girl with fire in her eyes who had once run up to him in town, handing him wildflowers with childish confidence. She had reminded him of the daughter he never had. That memory burned in his chest. He whispered into the dark, "Hold on, Clara. I'm coming." Each mile deeper into the woods wasn't just a journey toward the outlaws, it was a march toward destiny. Near midnight, Elias reached a clearing where smoke curled into the sky. There, nestled in the ruins of an abandoned mining shack, the Redden brothers roared with drunken laughter. Their rifles glistened in the firelight. Beside the flames, Clara sat bound, her face pale and streaked with tears, but her spirit unbroken. Elias crouched low, heart pounding. 6 men, 6 guns. He steadied his breathing, his hand tightening on the revolver's grip. The odds were impossible. But Elias wasn't thinking of odds. He was thinking of duty. He glanced at Clara, meeting her terrified eyes from the shadows. She stilled, as though sensing hope. Whispering a prayer beneath his breath, Elias muttered, "Lord, guide my hand." The moment stretched like eternity. Then, with the silence of a predator, he raised his revolver and stepped into the firelight. The law had come knocking on the devil's door, and the devil was about to answer. The quiet shattered with thunder. Elias's revolver fired, striking one Redden brother square in the chest. The man dropped, a look of shock frozen on his face. Chaos erupted instantly. The remaining brothers scrambled, shouting, rifles clanging against the shack walls. Bullets tore through the air, splintering wood, sparking against stone. Elias moved with a calm born of violence, firing, ducking, dragging Clara behind a stack of crates. Her small hands trembled as she clutched his arm. He whispered, "Stay low." But fate wasn't merciful. A burning line of pain ripped through his side. First blood. He staggered but gritted his teeth, holding firm. Clara gasped, "You're hit!" Elias gave her the faintest smile. It's not the first time. Then he rose again, revolver blazing. He wasn't just fighting for her life. He was fighting for the soul of Hollow Creek. And nothing in him was willing to quit. The battle raged like thunder on the mountain. One bullet tore through Elias's shoulder, spinning him back. Another ripped across his thigh. The third grazed his arm, blood soaking his sleeve. By the time the 6th bullet tore into his chest, the sheriff's body could take no more. He fell to the dirt, vision dimming, breath ragged. Clara screamed his name, struggling against her bonds. The Redden brothers laughed cruelly, circling him like wolves. "The lawman's finished," one sneered, spitting into the dust. But as Elias lay broken, something deep within him sparked. He thought of his wife's smile, of Clara's eyes begging for life, of the promise he made. And with a groan that seemed to rise from the earth itself, Elias pushed against the ground. Slowly, impossibly, he stood, bloodied, trembling, yet unbowed. The outlaws froze. No man shot 6 times should rise. Yet there he was, staring them down. The air turned to ice. The brothers, hardened killers who feared nothing, suddenly looked like children staring into a nightmare. Elias's face was pale, his coat drenched in blood, yet his revolver was steady, his eyes burning with a light that wasn't entirely human. "He ain't alive," one whispered. "He can't be." Another stumbled back, dropping his gun. Elias rasped, voice like gravel dragged across stone. "I don't need to be alive. I just need to finish this." He fired. Another outlaw fell, then another, the sheriff moving with grim determination. The ground seemed to shake beneath his steps. Fear spread like wildfire through the gang. Some fired wildly, others fled into the trees. The legend was born in that moment, not of a man who couldn't be killed, but of a man who refused to lay down, no matter how deep the grave seemed to be. When the smoke cleared, Elias stumbled toward Clara, each step agony. His revolver clattered from his hand, spent. He dropped to one knee beside her, sawing through her ropes with his knife. She threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You'll die if you stay," she pleaded. His bloodied hand brushed her hair from her face. "Child, I'll die one day no matter what, but tonight ain't that night." He shoved her gently toward the trees. "Run to your father. Don't stop until you see him." Clara shook her head desperately, but his stern gaze left no room for argument. She fled, her small figure swallowed by the woods. Elias turned back to the shack, flames licking higher into the night. The remaining brothers were regrouping. He could barely stand, but he raised his chin. This was no longer about surviving. It was about finishing what he started. The shack burned like a funeral pyre, flames roaring into the pre-dawn sky. The last of the Redden brothers circled Elias, their faces twisted with disbelief. How could a dying man still fight? Yet Elias moved with the strength of purpose. Each shot he fired, each swing of his knife, was fueled by something greater than flesh, a will that refused surrender. By dawn, the outlaws were finished. 2 lay dead, others fled into the wilderness, their empire of terror in ashes. Elias collapsed onto the dirt, revolver slipping from his hand. Clara and her father found him there, bathed in morning light. He was broken, bleeding, his chest heaving like a bellows. Yet his heart still beat. Thomas Hale dropped to his knees, cradling the sheriff with tears in his eyes. "You're alive," he whispered. Elias's lips curved faintly. "For now." That's enough. For 3 weeks, Elias hovered between this world and the next. The town doctor shook his head more than once, saying, "No man survives wounds like these." But Elias did. Fever gripped him. Visions danced before his eyes. His wife's face, her voice calling softly, "Not yet, Elias. Not yet." He dreamed of the battlefield, of gunfire and smoke, of graves unmarked. Each time death beckoned, he turned his head away. The townsfolk took turns keeping vigil, some praying, others simply sitting in silence. Clara came every day, whispering to him about the school lessons she'd missed, about the flowers she'd seen blooming. Her small voice was an anchor. Against all odds, Elias lived. His body was scarred forever, but his spirit refused to break. And the people of Hollow Creek began to believe. Maybe the sheriff wasn't just a man. Maybe he was something more. The story of the sheriff's survival spread across counties like wildfire. Some hailed it as God's miracle. Others muttered darkly that he'd bargained with the devil. "No man shot 6 times walks again," the preacher warned from the pulpit. But Clara spoke boldly to anyone who'd listen. "He rose because he couldn't leave us behind." Her words softened many hearts. Still, a quiet unease lingered. Farmers crossed themselves when Elias passed. Children whispered of ghosts. The sheriff himself carried no illusions. "I'm no saint," he told the doctor. "I just ain't finished yet." But whether miracle or curse, his survival became more than just a story. It became a mirror for the town, reflecting their fears, their faith, and their understanding of what one man's sacrifice could mean. 6 weeks later, the people of Hollow Creek gathered in the town square. Rumors had flown all morning. "He's coming." When Elias finally appeared, limping, scarred, hat pulled low, silence fell over the crowd. He looked weaker, older, yet his presence filled the space like thunder. He climbed the church steps, gazed out at the people he had nearly died for, and said simply, "The Reddens are gone, but evil don't rest. Neither will I." The words carried no firebrand's flourish, no preacher's poetry. They were plain, heavy, real, and they landed like hammer strikes in every heart. Some wept, others cheered, but all understood. Whether blessed, cursed, or simply stubborn beyond reason, Elias Grady would not stop until his last breath. In that moment, Hollow Creek didn't just see a sheriff. They saw their shield. Though the town called him their hero, Elias carried shadows no one else could see. At night, he woke drenched in sweat, hearing the crack of rifles, feeling bullets tearing flesh. Sometimes, in the silence of his office, he swore he heard his wife's voice whispering, "Soon, Elias." Soon he never spoke of these hauntings, but people noticed the distance in his eyes, the way he'd pause at Clara's laughter or the preacher's hymns, as though clinging to a tether in the storm. The man who refused to fall was still only a man. He bore his scars like armor, but inside, the war never left him. And yet, each morning he rose, pinned on his badge, and walked the streets. Haunted, yes, broken, perhaps, but still unyielding. One autumn evening, a group of boys gathered around Elias as he sat on the church steps, his cane resting against his knee. Their eyes wide, they pointed to his scars, the way his coat hung awkwardly over his ruined shoulder. "Sheriff," one finally asked, "did it hurt when they shot you?" Elias chuckled softly, though it ended in a cough. "Son, everything worth doing hurts. Loving, fighting, standing up. Pain's the price, but you do it anyway, because if you don't, someone else pays the price instead." The boys nodded, the weight of his words settling deeper than any school lesson. Later, one of those boys would grow to be a lawman himself, carrying those words like scripture. For Elias, it was enough to know the next generation might learn not just from his survival, but from the truth carved into his flesh. Courage is never painless. Years rolled on. Clara grew into a young woman, her spirit as fiery as the night she was saved. One spring morning, Elias received a letter in her delicate handwriting. "You saved me," it began. "But more than that, you showed me what courage is. Because of you, I became a teacher. I tell every child in my care that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising when you've been struck down. I hope they carry that lesson as I carry you in my prayers." Elias read the letter again and again, tears blurring the words. He folded it carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat, the same coat that still bore the bullet holes. To him, Clara's words were worth more than any monument. They were proof that the pain he endured had not been in vain. His legend had given birth to hope. By the winter of 1895, Elias Grady's body had worn down like a river stone. His limp grew heavier, his breath shorter, his hair silvered with age. Yet he still walked the streets each morning, tipping his hat to townsfolk, nodding to children, and offering quiet counsel when needed. Then, one cold night, he simply didn't rise again. They found him in his bed, locket in hand, his wife's portrait pressed against his chest. He had not fallen to bullets or knives, but to the gentle hand of time. The town buried him beneath the great oak by the churchyard, his badge laid across his chest. People traveled for miles to stand in silence as the preacher said, "He rose when no man should have risen. He stood when others would have fled. And in doing so, he showed us all what it means to live with purpose." Years became decades. Hollow Creek grew, trains came, electricity sparked through wires, and yet the story of Elias Grady never faded. Children shivered at campfires, whispering of the sheriff who rose after 6 bullets. Some swore his ghost still walked the ridges, watching over lost travelers. But beneath the supernatural tales lay a truth passed from father to son, mother to daughter. He didn't rise because he couldn't die. He rose because others needed him to. That truth carried through the years like a lantern against the dark. People drew strength from it in their own battles, in wars, in sickness, in grief. "Be like the sheriff," they'd say. "Stand up one more time." And so, the macabre legend of the Ozark sheriff endured, not as a tale of ghosts or miracles, but as a lesson carved into time. Life will strike you down, sometimes 6 times in a single night. It will bleed you, break you, whisper that it's easier to stay down. But Sheriff Elias Grady showed that sometimes the most powerful act is to rise, shaking, scarred, but unbowed, and face the world again. His story was never about bullets. It was about resilience, about sacrifice, about the strength that comes when you fight.